I love you. Appreciate you being here, and it means a lot to me. And to all my panelists that are out there answering questions constantly, I love you all too. Thank you so very much for being here. Good evening, everyone. Hugs and stitches to you all. This is indeed Walter Floriani, and I'm honored to give you a little webinar tonight called "Fill to the Brim." As you know, the last few webinars that we've done, we've been discussing the individual stitch types. We certainly started with a running stitch, went to the satin stitch. We're going to fill this one with the last stitch, the fill stitch. And I want to begin by just giving you some general rules on fill stitching. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little design here and go ahead and turn it into a fill. I want to cover the rules, number one, with fill stitch. First of all, you know that within Floriani software, we have a wonderful feature when you use the ruler and you select it and you measure the area to be digitized. You'll see right there, 80 millimeters wide. It's going to tell you use a fill stitch. I think this is such a wonderful feature. Stitch type has always been determined by width. Look, there are some general rules. As I covered in the first one with a running stitch normally 2/10 of a millimeter up to about 1 millimeter is telling you it's a running stitch. From 1 to 7 or 8 millimeters in width for me is a satin stitch. Now, look, quite honestly, depending upon the fabric that you are, let me put it like this. For every rule, there's an exception to the rule. You can stretch widths of satin stitches sometimes up to 10 millimeters, sometimes a little wider. But for me, the general rule is 7 to 8 millimeters, the widest stitch for a satin stitch. Fill stitch, basically anything wider than 8 millimeters wide is determining that it should be a fill stitch. Again, you can stretch that. Some people start fills at just 10 millimeters or such. Based on the fact that I stitch on a lot of knit fabrics, a lot of stretchy fabrics. My limit again is 8 millimeters. So the first rule for fill stitching is width. Now I'll go ahead and I'll generate a fill stitch right here. Because I'm using a piece of artwork, a vector file, I don't have to select the fill. It shows already over here in my sequence view as a piece of artwork. I don't always cover this, but two ways to really digitize. You can come up here and select your complex fill and traditionally digitize a fill. When you're working with vector-based art, and you'll always know because when you bring in a piece of artwork, if it generates over here in the sequence view and you use the import artwork function, or if you use indeed like I did the artwork tool here, it's a vector-based file. All I have to do here is right-click and I can just say convert to a complex fill and boom, it'll put it in as a fill stitch. The first rule beyond width that I want to talk about is the pull and the push, okay? Pull and push, again, being the two constants in the embroidery process. Now, as simply as I can put it, I'll make this look 3D. Any direction, you'll see my stitches going straight up and down here. First of all, I guess I should have started editing a little bit on the fill stitch. Once you go into selection and you come down to your third icon shape in your editing tools over here on the left, you get the editing features. Here you can stretch or shape the fill a little differently. Here's my angle line. I can grab the angle line. I can move it to another angle. Right now I'm going to like a 0 degrees angle. Right click and the angle changes. Of course, green is always your start point. Red is always your end point. Now, I've changed the direction. I'm going straight left to right. My pull is going in that left to right direction. Any direction the stitch goes is your pull direction. The opposite ends being the flat, what I call the flat ends, the top and bottoms are your push directions. Pull simply means that stitching left to right, the fill stitch is going to get narrower. Now, how much pull takes place in a fill? A fill stitch stitched on a knit product, when stabilized correctly, the pull is normally 5/10 of a millimeter. So if you're doing this in a manual mode, certainly you're going to select your fill. You come up here to your properties box and you see you have your pull push icon. select it. Again, one of the wonderful features about our software are the absolute values, and I can say absolutely on both sides I'm going to add 5/10 of a millimeter. The normal pull. When I wrote my book years and years ago, I wrote in the book that the normal pull of a fill ranges from 3 to 5/10. It can be increased to 6 or 7/10 if you're not stabilized correctly. But basically, when stabilized correctly, that fill is going to get 5/10 of a millimeter narrower on both sides. Here's my control point for it. I put in 5/10, I hit apply, and you'll see the fill gets wider on both sides. If I undo that, you know what, I could have given you a couple of guidelines here so you'll actually see the pull take place. I'll put one right there. I'll put one right there, and you'll see that when I've selected again, go into pull, select my absolute value, come down here on both sides. I'm going to put in 5/10 more, click apply. 5/10 wider. You can see that it went beyond there. If you do not see that, I'll zoom in a little more, and you'll see that if I grab the ruler and measure that, indeed I'm right at that 5/10 of a millimeter. 5/10 of a millimeter is what I consider the natural pull of a fill stitch. Now, you'll also see that at the top and the bottom, and I'll put a little guideline here. Push is a result of thread weight. Thread has weight, folks, measurable weight, and density. Density, of course, being how close we put our stitches next to each other. The normal push, what that means is that the fill is actually going to grow in height. Is, again, in my book written, 3 to 5/10 of a millimeter. If your density is perfect, you're going to see about 3/10 of a millimeter in size increase. The height of the fill is going to grow 3/10. If your fill is, or if look, 40 weight thread, what we normally use, and the proper density I'm going to set as a 0.4, the normal density setting for a full fill with 40 weight thread. But 40 weight thread, while it's all 40 weight, in the dyeing process, my contention is that we have what we call puff colors. The thread seems to get a little heavier. When I go into my peaches and into some of my yellows, even though it's 40 weight, it seems to lay a little heavier to me. So based on density, and actually based not only on the weight of the thread, but for me, the color of the thread, push can also increase up to about 7/10 of a millimeter. I normally say, again, the standard is 5/10. Once again, if I want to control it in the software, select it, go into your pull-push compensation. Again, Floriani software, one of the highlights of it is that it is one of the only softwares with push compensation. Not a lot of softwares have the push compensation. They all have pull. They don't all have push, okay? Push is a big part of the process. Again, I'm going to put in 5/10 down here. I'm going to apply it, and you'll see that the fill stitch actually shrunk in height 5/10 of a millimeter. That is the normal push of your fill stitch. The normal pull 5/10, the normal push 5/10. Now, let me be real clear. This is if you are doing your compensations manually. Realize that in Save to Sew, these functions are performed for you automatically. That's the beauty of Save to Sew. In Save to Sew, DJ and I were able to put in both the pull compensation and the push compensation. They do vary from material to material, but if I change it back to what it was originally and I just come in and hit File and Save to Sew, no matter what fabric that I choose, and I hit Next, Apply, and Yes. Of course, it's going to tell you how to stabilize it, but boom, your pull and your push is absolutely controlled in the same manner. Now look, one other thing I want to talk very much about with fill stitch, and I didn't even write this on my outline, but I wanted to be very clear with this. One of the things that controls a fill stitch, and I'm going to come into shape, and how a fill stitch runs are your start points and your exit points. And the exit point being probably the most crucial point within a fill stitch. Example, I'm going to put my exit point right here. Irregardless of where my start point is, what this fill is going to do is, number one, it's going to come in and put in the underlay. Then it's going to start doing the stitching probably here from the top, and it's going to stitch down to the exit point. Then it's going to transcend down, and it's going to start stitching back up to the exit point. Everything moves towards the exit point. So if I come into a slow redraw, now it might start at the bottom, work its way up, come to the top, work its way down. But let's see. Nope, I was right. So it's going to come to the exit point, then it transcends down to the bottom, and it's going to work its way back up again, moving towards that exit point. This is a negative, okay? Let me explain. Fill stitch is the most obtrusive stitch to fabrics. So as the fill stitch initially, and I'll back up again, is coming down here now with that fill, you're actually pushing the material in this direction, okay? Now as it comes down and works its way back up, you're pushing the material up. So many times when this happens, what you end up with right here at the exit point is a piece of material that's kind of popped up and out. Doesn't look like you have enough density. You have plenty of density. The issue is that in the fill stitch, as it was running, it moves the fabric, okay? Now, stabilizing correctly again on a piece of knit, I'm going to use, always for me, a fusible, because a fusible helps solidify the material, but it's still a negative. Now, there is an overlap that you can go ahead and you can control in the properties box, but the biggest control for this, select your fill, go into shape, let your exit point, entry point, start. Doesn't really matter where I put the entry point or the start point, but what I want to do is I always want to put the exit point, the farthest point and the lowest that I can in the fill, okay? Now, I could have put it at the top here. Well, in fact, I'll show you. If I do it like this, it's going to do my underlay. It's going to start at the top. Now I have a forward progression fill all the way to the bottom of that, to the last point in the design. If I once again select it, I come into shape and I move the end point up to here, the reverse is going to happen, okay? What that means is when I come in to do the redraw, now it's going to start from the bottom and it's going to work its way up. Now, what the start point more controls is you saw how that underlay first came down, okay? That's because where I place the start point. If I want to control how my underlay works within it, once again, select it, come into shape, simply take that start point, and I can put that start point over here on the side, okay? What that's going to do now in a slow redraw is you're going to see it starts right there, walks to the other side, produces the underlay, then I have a continuous fill, everything walking in a forward movement, okay? I think that's an incredible point to make. It does affect how your fill stitch runs. That's why I think it's important to point out. I'm glad I thought of it, actually, folks. Now, look, I also want to talk about some of the other controls. The normal fill stitch density with 40 weight thread is a 0.4 to a 0.5. I tend to go to a 0.5. 0.4 has been the standard for years, but I find that with polyester thread, I used to use a lot of rayon. Polyester thread seems to me to lay a little heavier than the rayon, so I've defaulted the software down to a 0.5 density. That for me now is the standard density for 40 weight thread in a fill stitch, all right? What I want to talk number one though about are your stitch lengths. The normal length for me is 4 millimeters. Now, let me explain. Actually, the range of stitch length I use in a fill, I vary from 3 millimeters to 5 millimeters, and let me explain why. I'm going to just do a keyboard letter T on the screen right here, okay? Let me make it another color. Let me explain something. If you've ever run a fill and all of a sudden you have a design stitching on top of the fill and you get a little gap in the fill, meaning that you see the material popping through the fill stitch, guaranteed that it is, in the case of this letter T, it's the stitches at the top of the T. See, going left to right is not really an issue. You're going the same direction as the fill. But once I start going up and down with my stitches, that's pulling on the stitch. Realize, and I'll mark the needle penetration points. In the needle penetration points on the fill, and you'll see one like here, and then you'll come over and you'll see one here, okay? This length of thread in between, there's nothing solidifying that to your base material. So these stitches going in the opposite direction will pull on that fill, and you'll actually see a gap in the fill stitch. If you are stitching on top of a fill stitch with a design and you choose to leave the fill under the design, my stitch length is 3 to 4 millimeters. I always used to use a 3 millimeter stitch. My brother-in-law Malcolm swore by a 4 millimeter stitch. When I started to put my theory together, the measurement theory, I tested them both. I found that indeed he was correct. A 4 millimeter length fill stitch, for some reason, it will not pull a gap. It's a short enough length that the pull is decreased really a tremendous amount, and there is no gap. If you see a gap and you've laid a 4 millimeter stitch, just go to a 3 millimeter stitch. Now, if I'm stitching a fill stitch and there is nothing on top of that fill stitch, I go to a 5 millimeter length, okay? Why? Because look, in the fill stitch right now, we have 5,360 stitches, okay? If I come into here and I say a stitch length, well, I'll put in the 3, number 1, okay, and hit apply. We've got 5,360, 6,700 stitches. And added a considerable amount of stitches. Well, the same holds true with going to a 5 millimeter stitch length, okay? Hitting apply, we just went down to 4,500 stitches. So it pulled roughly 1,000 stitches out from that 4 millimeter to that 5 millimeter. Doesn't mean it to everyone the same, but to me, I call that stitch consciousness. I mean, I love watching an embroidery machine run, but I also do what I can to minimize the stitch count, and especially in a fill. Again, a fill stitch is the most obtrusive stitch to material. It distorts the material more than any other stitch. By reducing the amount of stitches in it, it's let's just call it kinder to the base material. So for me, rules of length range from 3 millimeters to 5 millimeters in length. What I'd like to talk about next is the density, all right? And what I recommend everyone to do, I'm going to open up another design here. I think I have it on my H drive, okay? And I'm just going to open up my exercise 5 right out of my book. Many of you who've seen me in the class know I use this in every class. This is a fill stitch density chart, folks. Let me explain. What I basically have here is a series of 9 boxes. In each box, I've set a different density. Let me explain. The first density that I set here, now, I know most of you have seen this, but I'll explain for you who don't or have never seen this before. But density is simply the distance between stitches along the edge of any given stitch type. Example, in this fill stitch, it has a point, well actually this is a stitch file, so I have to measure it. Ever want to measure a density? Grab your ruler, go to any stitch along the edge of the fill stitch, measure the distance over to the next stitch, 4/10 of a millimeter. That means that I've spaced the stitches 4/10 of a millimeter apart. It's all density is. Density is simply the distance between stitches along the edge of any given stitch type. You can measure densities. Look, there's value to that. You'll run a design, it'll feel butter soft. You can go in and actually measure the density in a stock design, because in a stock design, unlike if I go back to the first fill that I did, the minute that I select that fill and we digitize it in the software, it tells you the density right here. When we go to a stitch file, you'll see that it's a fill stitch, okay? But it doesn't tell you the density setting that the digitizer did. So you have to measure it. It's telling me my density is 4/10 of a millimeter. So that's the first box that I made, all right? The second box, as we move over, you'll see that all I did was go up one whole number, and I now set this density as, if you measure it, 0.5. Measure either direction, doesn't matter. The one rule to measuring densities is never do it in the middle of the fill. There's a transition stitch getting from one side to the other. If you measure in the middle of the fill, you're only ever going to get half of the density setting, or approximately right at half of the density setting in that transition stitch. Always measure along the edge. The point to this exercise, and I think everyone needs to do this exercise, is different threads, different materials, like different densities. Again, automated for you in Save to Sew. In the 60 some odd materials that we've induced into Save to Sew now, I've checked the densities and have put in the proper numbers for all those material types. But in learning the process, I think there's something to be said for studying. Even when I teach people to this day and we go through Save to Sew, I show them how to simply zoom in. And if you want to know what a density is on any given material, just grab that ruler and measure that distance. You'll see in this one it's a 0.6, okay? The way density works is the higher the number, the lighter the density. The lower the number, the tighter the density. That's wonderful knowledge to have. Now look, again, it's been simplified, it's been automated for you, but in the days when we didn't have software like we have now, having this ability to go in and measure densities and such, or having a density chart like you see here on the screen right now, was invaluable. Why? Because different materials like different densities. I would run I have a new piece of material I've never stitched on before. I would run my density chart on that piece of material. What I looked for was the best coverage. I do not want to see the base material shining through, but the density that yielded the best coverage with the highest number was the density that I chose. Most of the garment distortion that you have when you're running a fill stitch, because it is such an obtrusive stitch to material, is based on density, okay? It's as simple as this. You have a 2-inch tall box and you're trying to put 2.5 inches of stitches in it. Something's going to give. It's always your base fabric. Now realize, stabilizer does somewhat control it. That's one of the reasons that I so love our fusible stabilizers. Fusible stabilizers stabilize the material to the fill stitch so the garment distorts less because of the connection that we've made to the stabilizer behind the material. So while indeed stabilizer does help, using proper densities is certainly one of the biggest things that I still cover in my class today. To me, there's too many stitches in embroidery designs, sometimes 40-50% more stitches than you need. Most of the garment distortions, and certainly the rock hard, what I call bulletproof embroidery that you feel, in many cases is based on fill stitches. They just are setting too much densities. You'll find when you're working with Floriani software, you're going to see density settings lighter than almost any other software out there. In my opinion, people don't study density enough. I could give a 5-6 hour class just on density in itself. I think it's that important of a process in it. Again, absolutely controlled by Save to Sew, but I think there's a lot said for being at knowledge base. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about, or two things that I want to talk about, we'll finish up on the rules. Number one is stitch direction, and then I want to cover a little bit of the underlay also. First of all, stitch direction. My fill stitch here is going left to right. I'm going to talk about underlay right at the same point in time. Whenever I do a fill stitch left to right, the normal underlay that I use is simply a perpendicular underlay, okay? Perpendicular underlay means I'm going the opposite direction as the direction of the fill stitch. No matter what direction I throw the stitch, perpendicular is going to throw it at the opposite direction. Example, I'll go ahead and change this direction of the fill to a 45 degree or so, and you'll see now that my underlay is going the opposite direction as the top stitch fill, okay? So normally that is the general rule for fill stitching. is you want an underlay. In the underlay, your densities are preset for you, so the density is exactly where it needs to be. Okay, your density is a very open 3 millimeter density, meaning there's 3 millimeters in between the lines. The normal rule is you simply go the opposite direction at the top stitch of the fill. Now though, when I lay a fill and I run, I'm going to go ahead and change the direction of this to 90 degrees, straight up and down, okay? When I run a fill straight up and down, I do not use the perpendicular underlay. The underlay that I choose to use here is full lattice, and let me explain. The full lattice underlay, as I zoom in here, okay, runs at 45-degree angles, 2 of them, to the top of the fill stitch. In a slow redraw, you'll see it's coming in at one direction. Actually, I had selected, or I allowed the perpendicular still to be on. I could turn it off at this point. All I'm really looking for is that lattice work. Having the perpendicular in there just adds a little greater loft, so you can leave it on there if you want. I don't think you can really use too much underlay. Underlay, again, are your lofting stitches. But let me explain something. A lot of times you'll do a fill stitch straight up and down on a piece of material. You'll set the normal density for the fill stitch, and you'll see the material popping through, the color coming through. It has nothing to do, everyone thinks it's a density challenge, so their solution is add more density, and then add more density, till indeed you're not going to see the material, but you have this nice little ripple effect in your material. The challenge is not density. The challenge is that a fill stitch going up and down, you're actually going the same direction as what I call the weave of the garment. If you take a knit shirt and you put it in your hands and you pull it and stretch it left to right, it stretches. Pull it from top to bottom and you'll see that it doesn't stretch. You're at full, basically, tensile length, the length of the thread in an up and down direction when you're pulling on that material. When you're pulling left to right, you're pulling the fibers apart. Fill stitching going up and down, what happens is the stitching is falling into the grain of the material. When you do this lattice work fill underneath a fill stitch going up and down, you have an effect of creating a foundation stitch underneath your fill. The loft is increased. Again, if you want to go ahead and add your perpendicular, that's fine. You're just adding more loft to it. But what happens is you will not have to increase density. That lattice work lofts it up. See, no matter what stitch is falling in, you've got stitches going 2 opposite directions. It basically doubles the loft, tripling the loft almost if you add that perpendicular, brings the stitching up and out of the base fabric, and I'll guarantee you will not see that material coming through. Now, the only other thing that I want to talk to is a rule about fill stitching, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off the underlay. I'm going to talk specifically about fill stitch direction. The software allows you in a shape mode to go any direction that you want to go. You can go up and down, you can go left to right. A lot of people lay fill stitches at 45-degree angles. Let me explain something. Again, the fill stitch is the most obtrusive stitch in the embroidery process. 90% of the fills that you'll ever see me lay as a digitizer are straight up and down or straight left to right. My contention is that I'm working with the grain of the material. When you lay a fill stitch, in this case in about a 45-degree angle, what happens is you're now working on the bias of the material. Happens on all fabrics, not just stretchy knits. All fabrics tend to stretch on the bias. You'll actually misshape the material. The material will actually look twisted. I wish you could see my hands right now because my hands are doing what the material would normally do. But it literally twists the material. And again, you think that you've got a density challenge normally. The challenge is stitch direction. The fill, again, most obtrusive stitch. I keep mine normally at 90 or 0 degrees. Now, one of the things that indeed helps control this, or 2 of the things, is number 1, I always use a fusible stabilizer. Fusible stabilizing helps eliminate the stretch on the bias. It solidifies the material so you get less garment distortion. And the other thing that can help when you want to work with opposite or degree of angle directions to your fill stitches is a good topping. Whether you're using our water-soluble topping or the Heat and Gone, both have the same premise. They loft the stitches, they help stabilize the top stitch. You'll get a lot less garment distortion. And now, I'm not saying I don't do fills in other directions. When I'm doing a lot of florals and I want to add dimension, because in embroidery, the stitch type creates the effect, the stitch direction creates the dimension. So many times in flower petals, I'll put opposite directions. In the old days, we called it counter pull because I could pull fabric back into its shape by putting an opposite or counter direction to the top fill stitch. Stabilizing correctly pretty much overcomes that now, but I'd be remiss not to point that out. Stitch direction for me again is everything with this. Again, if you're going to lay directions like this, the biggest control really with fills for me again, start and end points. I'm always going to put that end point the farthest away. Because again, when I come in, start points and end points are almost everything because you're driving the direction. It's what actually drives the direction of your fill stitch. Okay? I always want it to move in that forward direction, whether going up and down or top to bottom or bottom to top. I want it to start at one end. I want it to end at the other end. Those are the base rules for your fill stitching. I'm going to take you through now the effects of fills that we offer within the software. Having covered just all the rules now, Kathy, I'm not going to have a lot of time to do it because I have a lot to cover. But if there are any initial questions regarding the rules, now would be a great time to ask them.
You know, Walt, we haven't. You've enraptured them. Where we are, if you have any questions.
Well, I do not mind enrapturing my family, my client base out there, and I appreciate that, folks. Normally that means you're enjoying it. I hope that's the case. I love doing this stuff. You know, so much of what we were doing with webinars initially were covering the features in the software. That was great, but now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. We're getting into the stitch types. You'll see in further webinars, we're going to just keep going deeper into the combinations of stitches and stuff. Now, for me at least, is where the real learning can take place. Literally, what I just covered, it's important stuff. Understanding proper widths, understanding the pull, understanding the push, understanding your lengths, understanding your start and end points, understanding your densities, understanding your stitch directions. That's important. Yes, we've automated it. I'm proud of that. But I think it's important to know from whence it came, from where those rules came. Spent my whole life running embroidery, and it's a pleasure to bring this to you all because this is what you find when you do it long enough. One of the things about embroidery that's always impressed me so much is that it's a self-teaching process. You do it long enough without any education. The process will teach you. Having access to people like myself, DJ, Kathy, our moderators, our educators who've studied this for a long time, just simply speeds the process up for you. For me, I think it's nice to know, so to speak, from whence it came. Okay, let's talk about your choices in fill stitches. Over here under your fill type, number one, you're going to see that your first choice, I'll click the down arrow. You do have a series of choices. I want to show you these. We'll go through them. But the first one I want to talk about is your standard fill. It always comes up, the default value is a tatami. Tatami is the Japanese vernacular for fill stitch. Fill stitches in some software can also be called step stitches. They are the same stitch. But in the standard fill stitch, if you click the down arrow below it, you do get a series of effects that we've put together for you. You get brick. You get a corn effect. My fill, I'll get back to that in the beginning or in a little bit. You've got your pattern 1, your pattern 2, random, satin, smooth, tatami, zigzag. And you see I have one called golf ball also that you will not see in your software currently. Let me explain. These are different effects. Once one learns the rules of the fill stitch, so to speak, and you can create or use a fill at will, and it always seems to work for you. Where do you go next? You go into special effects on your fill stitches. Now I'll give you a tip for learning which ones to use. But basically, look, a random effect. When I'm doing things like grass, lawn, or I'm doing trees, bushes, a random, or hair, a random effect is a great one to choose, okay? If I select random and click apply, I'll make it look 3D. It puts in a random effect. That's how we create the effect of hair, okay? Now, these are controlled by what we call partition line sequences. Now, what you can do, and one of the things that not a lot of people are aware of, is within our software under Tools, you have a standard pattern creator, okay? These are your partition line sequences, all right? Yeah, this is just in Total Control. This is not in Suite. The standard pattern creator, I'm sorry, DJ was just telling me, and I meant to cover that. I apologize. But what you basically, when you hit add, you can put in a series of numbers, okay? Basically, if I come in here and I change the number on it, it changes the effect of the fill stitch, okay? And as you come down along the numbers, it will start, because you can come in and you can add another one. See, by changing that to a 23, this is where the needles are now going to drop. I can add a second line. I can change that to another value. It's got a 0 value. You create different effects. Now, I don't recommend that anyone really, or that everyone go in here and play with this. You can play with this indeed. But we've given you a wonderful choice. But when you see like my fill or like golf ball, what I was trying to create with the golf ball effect, and I'm still working on it, is that when you choose that standard fill, and I do a lot of work in the golf industry, it actually stitches the dimples in a golf ball. It literally pulls the dimples in there and looks very, very realistic. Now, what I suggest that you do is, just like you saw with the density chart, make a series of boxes. You've got 8 or 9 different effects here in your standard fill stitches. Stitch one out in each effect. You'll see the different effects that you got. To me, I call those cheat sheets. I hang it up in my office. When I want to apply a certain effect, I can look right over at my cheat sheet and apply that effect. Now, there is another way to learn that. You all know that within the software, or those of you who own my Floriani software, we give you 5 designs every month. I've said this over and over again now, but a basis for those designs is not that I'm just a nice guy and want to give you designs. Indeed, I do, but it's a learning curve. Look, let me explain. Most of you know that in this design, or in the library, this design is actually implanted in the software already. It wasn't a free design, but it is in there. You'll have to ungroup it. If you ever bring a design on the screen and it's all your select color, right click and just say ungroup. Okay, when you ungroup it now, when you do a select, I'm going to go back to sequence view now. When I do a select on any given area, okay, it'll highlight just that area now. But let me explain. I'm going to go into 3D. If you ran this design, you'll see when you run that hair, that really looks like hair. You'll see when you run, just in this case, that grass, it really looks like grass, okay? That's a special effect. Now, how can you determine it, and what's the value of having these designs? Look, these designs being created for us are done in what we call our outline file, our C2S format. I see that green, I select it. Once I've selected it, I can select up here. I click on the plus sign, it opens it up. You see that they used a complex fill. When you click on that complex fill, every setting that digitizer used is right up here in your properties box. You'll see they used a standard fill with a random effect, with a stitch length of 3 and a density of 0.65. Just make a note of that, because if you ever want to duplicate that exact effect and you go into your fill stitch, you'll select your fill, you'll come in and you'll pick your random effect. You'll change your stitch length to the 3 millimeters. You'll come in here and you'll change your density to the 0.65. You'll lay your fill, and you just effectively recreated that specific effect. Those stock designs I give you, many of them have wonderful effects in them because they are in our outline files. They are a wonderful learning curve. Utilize it for that, folks. But again, I would recommend you make a series of boxes and create those different fills in those boxes, all right? That's your standard fills. The next fill choice that you get is embossing, and I really do enjoy embossing. Again, I'm going to come in here and just make a fill stitch right now. You all know how to create a fill. If you don't, I'll do it again. Basically, I'll undo that. I select my complex fill. Traditionally, to digitize, I'm going to simply left click, left click, left click. I'll left click down here at the bottom. I don't need to click again. It'll see that line automatically. Right click generates my fill stitch. Okay? Fill stitches are the easiest stitches to input, and that's basically your input. A series of left clicks followed by a right click. If you're using the magic wand, you'll select the element, select your fill, select your magic wand, select your color. And then you can just right click and that'll end. Left click, then a right click, and that'll end it. Now, your second choice is what we call embossing. I'm going to select on the embossing. Currently in embossing, okay, there are basically something like 199 effects in there. Now, what embossing is, these are all, just like in the standard ones where I showed you the standard pattern creator, these are partition line sequences that we've put in there, okay? When you select an embossing application, simply hit apply. Now when I make it look 3D, you'll see the effect. And it creates that in your fill. I love the embossing process. I really do. And you do get like 199 effects in there. Now, though, let me explain something. Those of you with total control, one of the things that we did in total control is we opened up the library files for embossing. What that means is you can now create your own embossing patterns. Let me explain, and I'll show you an example. I'm going to start a new pattern. I'm going to come in and hit File, and I'm just going to say Import True Type Text. And I'm going to hit Import your True Type Text. I'm going to put my caps on cap locks. I'm going to come right here where it says My Text, and I'm going to type in my name, Floriani. What is going on here? Okay. I'm working on a laptop that I plugged in a secondary keyboard in. I started typing on the keypad on my laptop, and I had a 3 coming up. It didn't make any sense. Anyway, all I've done now is I've generated just a piece of art. There's nothing digitized about this design at all. If I come over here to the sequence view, you'll see it's all artwork. Every letter is just simply a piece of artwork. But now what I can do with this, and watch this, just File, digitize nothing. Save as, okay? The trick is now here, under Save as Type, up at the top, you're going to see that we opened up the embossing patterns. Select embossing patterns and hit Save. Now, I've already done this, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go back to that embossing pattern. I'm going to select it. Now, I've got to make one change to it. If you're going to do this with a name or with words, I always change the angle to like a 45. Doesn't really matter what angle, but I change the angle. I've typed in the name Floriani. Going to let the angle change take place. I'm in embossing, but now down at the bottom of this list, you'll see the name Floriani. I can select it. I can hit apply. It just takes a few seconds. This is a strong part of the program, and watch what happens. You'll see the name Floriani imposed in that fill stitch over and over and over again, okay? I think that was a wonderful update. DJ himself worked very, very hard to bring that to you. Basically what it's doing by bringing in that piece of artwork, it's basically automatically, if you can't see it, I'll change to orange. I think maybe you can see it a little better in the orange, okay? Can you see that better in the orange? Yellow was better. We'll go back to the yellow. Doesn't really matter. But you'll see the name Floriani. Now, I should have done it a little differently in that what I should have done was left a space in between, or put a space at the beginning and a space at the end, and you would have seen it more clearly. But that's pretty cool. Basically, I'm able to bring in a piece of artwork. I'm able to save it as an embossing pattern where it automatically determines the partition line sequence. Now realize though, you're just not limited to like words like this. You can actually bring in a piece of artwork, and I'm just going to hit File and New, or excuse me, File and Open. And then without opening anything right now, I'm just going to go ahead and go into my embossing patterns. Right here, these are the ones, like that 191, they're right here. Select one, okay, and I'll open it up. Now again, this is not a digitized pattern. This is just a piece of artwork scanned into the system. So I bring in that piece of artwork, I import that piece of vector art, okay? Once it's in, once again, File, Save As, just simply save it as your embossing pattern. Now, when you hit that save and you create that effect in the fill, there it is in your fill stitch, okay? That's amazing to me. You can not only do things like with keyboard lettering, because then you can come into select. I think an embossing pattern, that was the very first one in the list. I think it was 100. It created this effect. Now, when you apply it, you're able to create your own embossing patterns in this manner. Not again just with like lettering, but you can actually bring in a piece of artwork into this. I'm going to go ahead and change the angle. If it comes out looking kind of funky like that, you're really not seeing. These work best when you're again 0 degrees, 90 degrees. Change that angle and you'll see the actual effect of that embossing pattern. But you cannot just do it with like lettering. You can actually create your own embossing patterns within total control. Really quite amazing. You can learn a lot. You can bring up one of those embossing patterns, measure the length. So when you see the effect here, your length in that does affect how it fills the area, just like in my lettering. If I made the lettering bigger, I'd have less Floriani's in there. I could make it real large. It would put just one in there. So you do have some nice controls. Just get in there and play with it. Okay. The next one that we have is you have motifs. All right. Now, in the motifs, you have 39 base motifs. And then you have 30 plus, a little over 30s, what we call DJ's motifs. DJ created for you a series of motifs. Because those of you, again, who own total control, you can now go in and create your own motifs. Motifs simply mean you select the motif, click apply, and it will apply the motif to your fill background. I love using the motifs in fill stitches. I really do. You can create some absolutely amazing effects. You can change your pattern length. There's your control within it. You can change your pattern length and actually change the effect on the motif. Once again, if I hit File and Open, you can go into your motif library, just go into your motifs, and you'll see it says it right on there. You'll see that it has your motif pattern. It's an MTP. Click on it. There's all your motifs. Now, if I were to open that up, these are stitch files. A motif is a stitch file. But you can bring that up. You can measure lengths. They're self-teaching. Bringing them up and just measuring lengths and that, you're basically creating one. Then when you're saving it, save it in your motif pattern, name it. It'll go right into that library list, and you now have access to all these magnificent motifs within the software. So the fill it's an absolutely incredible feature, because fills used to be just those flat type fills, and you had to know what you were doing to change your partition line sequences. Standard fills, we've given you a bunch we've created for you. To me, in embossing, you're limitless, because now again you don't have to figure out your own sequences. You can scan in a piece of artwork, turn it into a motif. Think about that. You can take a piece of line artwork, bring it in, and as long as it's like a single line, an outline picture, just a picture, you just import a vector file picture into your software. If you like the image, save it. You can emboss with that. I think that's incredible. You could take the same line design and create it as a motif. You just have to do motifs considerably smaller. You can fill with motifs now. Again, embossing being shapes within the fill, motifs being stitch files within the fill. Below that, you have what we call shapes. Shapes was a new feature to Total Control also. There are currently 10 different shapes within it. If you go ahead and pick your shape, just pick one, click apply. Now, these are always done with fairly open densities. Again, realize that if I want it to be like a full density fill, most of the times those are done with like a 0.4 or a 0.5. Going to like a 2 density is a very open effect. This is allowing the higher the number, the tighter or the lighter the density. So this allows the material to come through when you set a density of like 2, okay? Setting a density 0.5, it's making a full density fill stitch. Seem to be having a conflict. There you go. It's a full density fill. I'm going to go back to that too because there is something that I want to show you with this. The lighter the density, the higher number, the lighter the effect. You also don't see that kind of linear lines created at these penetration points that you do. But one of the neat things that you can do with your shapes is that you can change the effect, number one, by changing the density. But you can also, again, I'm going to do like a normal select, but then come into your shape feature, third icon on the left. You can change the emanation point. They always default to the center of your fill, but I can move that anywhere in the design that I want. Then a right click, and you'll see now that that triangle will emanate from that point. That can be real cool when you're using, oh my gosh, even the circular one, because I can look like it's going back in a hole, okay? Kind of a neat effect that you can really do. So that ability to just grab it, put it anywhere that you want, you're just changing the emanation point on the fill. You do get a series again of 10 shapes. In Total Control, once again, you do have the ability to create your own shapes. Again, want to see what that entails, just hit File and Open. Just come down here and select those shapes. Those shapes in this pattern, just under your shape pattern, select one. You'll see exactly what was digitized. They're just so simple to do, okay? They're just so simple to do. Again, this is a stitch file. You're basically creating one, and you can create all the shapes that you want within your fill stitching. I think that's really pretty amazing, okay? The next control point that you have, or the next choice that you have, is contour stitching. Contour stitching basically is just scrolling out from the center, absolutely controlled by your density. If you're not getting the right shapes, change your density. It really works. I tend to use this a lot when I'm doing circular. So if I'm coming in and doing like ellipse or I'm doing circles, I really like it when you're doing it with this because now I can select it. I can right click, I can come in and tell it to make it the convert it to a complex fill. Okay, once it's a fill stitch, I can come in and say change it into a contour stitch, and I can apply it, and you'll get a nicer scroll out from the center. I don't use the contour a lot, but I do indeed use it. It has some nice controls in it, and it is kind of trick. Okay, now the next choice that you have, and it's one that I really like, is I love stippling within the software. So you can come in to select your stippling, simply hit apply, and it'll stipple your control point again. If you want a micro stipple, just change the density. Take the density number down. You can go down even less, and you can micro stipple. I always tell, let's say you're doing a baby blanket and you really like them, you'll go to a micro stipple. If you might not like the baby or the mom, simply take the number up and you can open up your stippling. You do have some really nice controls. There is no ability to go in and change stippling effects. If you've ever seen the My Decorative Quilter software, you see that we were able to put that control in My Decorative Quilter, and we give you a whole series of like motif shapes that run like stippling. We have not done that yet to Total Control, but you know the software is always changing, so you do have some nice controls with that. I do enjoy the stippling very much. And the last one being the wave stitch. The wave stitch is pretty cool. You come in, it'll make a wave. Now, you do have some great control points on it. You certainly can move any of the control points. You do have your Bezier curve, so you can come in and change your curves. Right click and you'll create those effects. Again, the density is very, very open. You change those densities. Look, this is great. I mean, I can come in here and I can shape these things like water if I want. You have some wonderful controls, excuse me, with your Bezier curve and stuff. You can really create some really wicked effects. Wicked, that's a California term, but you can create some really neat effects with the wave stitching, okay? Look, those are all your choices and controls within your fill stitching, but that's not all. I'm going to go back to the standard fill. Let me just take the density back to a normal density of 0.4, and let's go ahead and apply that. The last thing that I want to cover with fill stitching is I'd like to cover the blending techniques, okay? There's a couple more things, but I want to cover blending number one. Oops, excuse me. I thought I had my phone all the way off. Okay? If you want to blend, generate your fill stitch. Right up here in your properties box is your blend stitch. Click on blend, okay? One of the really great things is that normally blends, look, you want to make a neat blend, normal density is a 0.4. I can lay two fills on top of each other with 2.8 densities. If 0.4 is a solid density, 0.8 is a half density. I can lay metallic silver with a 0.8 density and then right on top of it, put another 0.8, 2.8s. 2.8 fills on top of each other actually equals a 0.4. You'll end up with one solid fill. But if you lay like metallic silver and then blue on top of it, you'll make water shimmer. It actually looks like sparkling water. But in the software, we built those controls for you. Now, what's really cool is that you have an ability to do a series of blends. So my first color here, I'm going to make blue, okay? Then I'm going to come in, select it, come into my blend feature, and I'm going to say I want a second color in this blend. Then you come over here, and it can auto-pick your colors, but I'm going to say the second color I want to be color number 2, which if you look down on the color bar, that is my red. But then I have the ability to go to a third color. I can say, let's add a third color, and I want to use my orange, which is color number 4. Then simply hit apply, okay? And what you're going to end up with is some really intensely beautiful blended fill stitches, okay? That means you've just taken 3 different colors and basically amassed them in one fill stitch with the proper density. It will not get rock hard or bulletproof, and you can create some magnificent, magnificent effects with your blends. Now, you have more controls with the blend also, because once you go into the blend, you have in your gradient fill choices, you have a linear increasing, go from a lighter to a heavier. You have linear decreasing, you have convex, and you have concave, either working from heavier in to out, heavier out to in. So again, I simply suggest you take these, you make a series of square boxes, do them with 2 colors, do them with 3 colors, and stitch them all out. You're going to see that you have some magnificent effects that you can do with those. Now, one other thing, or 2 more things that I want to cover real quickly. Number 1 is with your fill stitching, auto bordering. Not everyone realizes that we have auto bordering. Look, you want to auto border, select your fill stitch. Once it's selected, right click and simply say create a border. The border that it generates is actually a running stitch border. So number 1, it is currently selected. When I generate it, it selects it. I'm going to right click to change the color, but then I'm going to right click again and I'm going to say convert that to a steel stitch. A steel stitch is a balance width satin stitch. It'll put an automatic satin stitch border. The software has auto bordering. You are in control of your width. That was a 3mm stitch. I'm going to turn it down to a 2mm stitch. I can auto border with a run stitch. I can auto border with a satin stitch. From the run, I can turn it into a motif. I can turn it into a bean stitch with a different variable series of needle penetrations. But not everyone realizes that we have auto bordering within the software. And the last thing that I want to cover is a lot of times on fill stitching, we merge designs. I'm going to grab a design right here, the basketball. I'm going to click on here and I'm just going to insert a basketball right on top of that fill. Many times when we're merging designs on top of a fill stitch, I've now put another fill on top of a fill. That builds a substantial amount of bulk. It helps contribute to bulletproof embroidery. The last control I want to show you when you're merging, select the one on top. It's a simple select, right click and simply say remove overlaps. What it will now do is it will take the stitching out from underneath the fill stitch so you don't get that fill on top of fill effect. It does leave some stitching under there. Normally it's just some of the underlays, but it so reduces the bulk in that fill stitching. So you do have the ability to merge on top of existing fill stitches. Simply select the image on top, right click, remove overlaps, and boom, no more bulletproof embroidery. Folks, I know that was a lot to digest. I am already over time. Kathy, if we have one or two last minute questions, I'll answer it. If not, I'm ready to say goodnight to everyone.
Well, Walter, we didn't have any questions. I think you did such a great job tonight. Fantastic, and as always, I've learned so much. I never watch a webinar that I don't learn from you.
Well, thank you, Kathy. You know, I'd say the same about you, honey. I've had the honor of sitting in many of your classes, and I'll just give a plug to all the Floriani educators. Folks, when one of the greatest things for me about this company is that you could go to a different Floriani event, in my opinion, every week. You'll see, in my opinion also, for what it's worth, the finest group of educators that I think have ever been assembled in this industry. But we all teach a little differently, and everyone has a specialty that they are not only incredible at, but I'll tell you something else about my educators. I'll tell you something about our moderators and everyone involved in this company who works with you directly behind the scenes and in software support. They're impassioned. They're people that love this process so very, very much. And I say that because I don't think you see that in every group of educators. Yes, everyone's got something interesting to say, something good to say, especially if they work on a piece of software. But when you bring an individual up in front of you who is impassioned by this process in its entirety, by the embroidery process, you give them a tool like our software that yields these uncanny levels of control. I think what takes place there is magic. It's amazing. I've sat through so many, well, mostly Darlene's classes, Kathy's classes, some of Debbie's classes. I haven't seen every educator, but I know from when we have our educator meetings, you get to be around people who love this process, who respect all of you like no other group of people that I've ever seen. I think that's part of the Floriani difference. I hope you've enjoyed this tonight. I have certainly enjoyed bringing this to you. I look very forward to the next one. This is Walter Floriani wishing you all hugs and stitches, folks. Good night.